So as you guys know on this channel, I'm trying to dive into other games other than just Call of Duty. And one of the things that's recently happened is a game got released by the name of Dragon Age The Veilguard. And if you've ever played a Dragon Age game before, some of them were really, really good. And needless to say, the public reception of this game has not been great so far. So I figured we would watch a video by Mr. Matty Play, someone who we've been watching on the channel lately. And I think who makes really good reviews and honest reviews at that. So we're going to dive in and see what he has to say about it, but just by the title, big disappointment is how he starts out. So let's see what he has to say.
There are fantasy options aplenty.
Let me start
metaphor
over.
There's no easy way to start this review. There are fantasy options aplenty. Metaphor, Refantasio, Elden Ring just got a...
Metaphor is one I actually want to try out. A game like that, kind of like, it seems like the turn-based strategy RPG. Kind of
out of the
something I'd like to give it a go.
Year, there was also Dragon's Dogma 2. And right now, AAA gaming is going through a massive, massive change where big companies like Bethesda Game Studios, BioWare, Ubisoft really have their back against the wall, and they're not quite the heroes of gaming that they maybe once were.
I would say most of them are like that.
Studios and CD Projekt Red have solidified them.
I said that last year we had more non-AAA games doing better than AAA games than ever before. Even like something small like Balatro, which is like a card game.
Themselves as top dogs in the RPG genre, thanks to projects like Baldur's Gate 3, Cyberpunk 2077, The Witcher 3, and so on. There are many great developers rising up in the RPG genre, like Warhorse Studios with Kingdom Come Deliverance. So there's many options beyond the ones that we used to know and love.
Assassin's Creed is another example of the failing one.
I've covered this game for years, since it was formerly known as Dreadwolf. Before that, it was very much just an idea on paper, and we were talking about it. I was very excited to see what BioWare could bring to the table. But unfortunately, after playing Dragon Age The Veilguard, it is one of the most disappointing games.
I wanted to say this in the intro. After seeing like all these people, like I haven't watched any videos on this yet, but I've seen like the titles of videos and people are not happy with it. What's interesting is after people went and played the game early, a lot of people were really excited for this game and there was like really positive sentiment behind it. Now
I've played in a while. I don't want to say ever because I don't want to get too much hyperbole in here, but the emotions I experienced throughout this review process was unlike anything I've ever gone through before. It was...
Yikes.
It was strange, man. I'm going to keep it real. Like, it was saddening as the realization set in.
I want to like understand why though, like
how much this game had let me down. I've had the game for about 2 weeks, put over 50 hours into it, finishing the main story, all of the companion missions,
He put time
and a bulk of the remaining side content. I'm at 72% of the way to the Platinum Trophy if you need a reference for how much of this game I've cleared off. But I'm not going to bury the lead any further. You're probably as surprised as I am to be hearing me say these things, but no single game has made me go through the string of emotions this one.
I just want to point something out. This is the IGN review for this game. I don't know if I can find it, but they give it a 9 out of 10. So...
has because its characters evolve as little as its gameplay. The mistakes made with plot pacing are innumerable. All of the real high impact choices are baked into the final 2 hours of the game, making them feel really minimal in the scheme of things. Past Dragon Age games matter little here if your 3 available choices in the keep taught you anything before launch, and I'll detail that one later. And last but definitely not least is the line delivery and writing quality are at times embarrassingly low, even for those who have sworn off BioWare for years and are not like me and have continued to play their games and look forward to them. So this is really tough because it does me no pleasure in back-to-back reviews to sit down talking about some of my favorite game developers ever who have made defining video games for me in Bethesda Game Studios and now BioWare, and not just deliver a negative review or a dissatisfied review, but something relatively scathing, especially in BioWare's case, when you consider the situation with their studio and how important the success of Dragon Age The Veilguard is to their company.
Yeah, this could shut down the company for sure.
All those great games that defined
which we've seen a lot of lately,
as a person even, have to come second to always being honest. And I'll get very much heavily into the thick of things here, but I think the first question you may have, and it's a totally fair one, is wait, your preview was like really positive, Maddie. Like, what's the
That's what I was saying. I don't even think I saw his, but I saw other people's.
Like, didn't you see enough then? So for starters, extended exposure to an issue will do that to you. 6 hours is really different to like 55. But secondly, BioWare and EA were not fully honest about the framing of this preview. As stated,
I've had that
in my
happen
preview,
in
what we
events
played was
before.
across 5 save files under the definition of the first act, with 2 more to go in the rest of the game. Now, I walked away very excited thinking, man, if this is the first act, imagine what they can bring for acts 2 and 3. Then I got the full game. I entered my 20th hour, still not at the end of act 1, what I experienced in the preview. 30th hour, still hadn't reached where my preview ended. It wasn't until the 35th hour that I...
So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. We've seen like in other games like Baldur's Gate, like some acts are really long in games. And that's okay. But
I'd hit this stretch of the game
here's
that was
what he
defined as Part 9. Now, Maddie, why does all of this matter? You've previewed a number of games before. Well, effectively, what EA and BioWare showed us, and in turn you, was a highlight reel of parts 1 through 9 in Dragon Age The Veilguard, and there are 14 in total in the game. And I would not personally define parts 1 through 9 of any 14-part story as a first act.
No.
That is almost, if not more than 75%, of the main story on display, including major choices. And while the perceived dishonesty here does not affect my final score, it definitely pissed me off. I am not going to hesitate on saying that, because this is the second time that this has happened to myself and others, where I remember going out to cover Redfall, and that was another dishonest preview, where the build we had there was nothing close to what we had in the final build. My point being, you see 3/4 of an entire game and you cut out all of the fluff, all of the crap in between, and just show the highlights of all of it. It's really hard to walk away negatively. And I don't mean that as an excuse, but hopefully just you can understand the difference between preview and review for me personally. Hearing all of that, you're probably like, I don't blame him for that. Have nothing positive to say at all, right? But then after 45 hours of really just slogging through it, those 5 final hours of this game, they do not make up for everything you go through. The ends do not justify the means, but man, what a finale. And it is such a terrifying...
That sucks, because at that point you just feel like the whole game's filler.
Reminder of what could have been if they spread this amount of choices, this amount of high-stake missions across the entirety of the game. It's the one point you feel like everything has been truly realized. It is definitely one of BioWare's most
other games do that, like Mass Effect comes to mind, but the game is actually good.
Over time, I want to hear what the community for Dragon Age has to say, but man, that final act, it's in that moment you're like, oh my God, what could have been? It hurts. That's why I said it was an emotional roller coaster. There has never been a game I've played that I've been so certain that every facet of it I was ready to dunk on, and I get slapped in the face by an absolutely awesome finale and go, wow, what could have been? And it really sets you off balance. It doesn't change much, but it makes you think, man. It makes you think. Anyway, this has been a ridiculous amount of setup. I know many of you are like, I'm here to know the score, bro. Just shut up and move on. But I like to set up my reviews with proper context before I go forward.
No,
so
I like that. I'm glad that you said that.
This is what I have the most to say about when it comes to the game itself, because it's where I think most of the problems in Dragon Age The Veilguard lie. Tonally, this is just not a Dragon Age game. There's no other way to put it for me.
Yeah, which is fine. It can be fine.
In visuals, in character work, there were many points throughout my review process where I felt my hands were on an entirely different IP. Now, before I go forward, I just want to frame my criticism a little bit more here, in that I have been a lifelong BioWare fan. My favorite game of all time is Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, which is a 2003 RPG from BioWare. But also, they have made games, as you know, like Mass Effect, like Dragon Age Origins. But I have also not fooled myself that the people who made those games I adore so much are no longer at the company.
And it's like Call of Duty as well, right? Like, that's like most studios that are old.
To me, Dragon Age Origins again, and certainly in Veilguard, I wasn't expecting that. But something on the level of Inquisition, I think, was fair, reasonable expectations. And as someone extremely critical of that game, I didn't even feel I got that out of BioWare. There are scenes where, and I mean this in the least insulting way, it truly felt like BioWare watched some Pixar films over the weekend and took that energy straight into the game.
Okay. Dragon. Deep breaths.
Pixar, I see what he means.
There. Oh, God.
Listen to the music.
Sorry. Just breaking things.
Objectively speaking, I see that moment and I go, hey, that's not awful. That's just, I don't know how else to put it. That's just not Dragon Age
Pixar.
to me. And there are
It's a great explanation of it
to be had throughout. I don't want to paint it all like it's miserable, but it does grind you down a lot because most of the conversations have nothing to do with the world of Dragon Age, the reason why so many of us are there. And when it does focus on its world, whether it be learning more about the Evanurus, learning more about the origins of the Titans, that is when the game is at its strongest, because then suddenly I find myself waking up from a trance and I'm like glued to my screen. I go, it's not me. I know I still like this stuff, because it was one of those reviews where I looked at it and went, am I jaded? Like, am I just hating stuff right now?
See, I don't know whether Maddie gives games like a score out of 10, but I am enthralled with what he's going to give it at this point.
Conversations came through. I went, no, man, they're just not doing this sort of stuff enough, which is what I've been looking for as a Dragon Age fan. And I do think that some of the writing is harmed by really bad voice direction given to the voice performers for this game. Like, listen to this.
You won't stop this, Nev Gallus. This is Tormentor's future.
You don't have Mimroth yet, Aelia. You'll need to go through me to get it.
That has such curse you evildoer, I'll stop you and you'll rue the day type energy. I couldn't believe again this was a BioWare game. But worse yet is the lacking of player agency. I mean, I remember specifically during the Fallout 4 discourse, that is where, for me in my world, the conversation was born about, I can't be an asshole in this game. And obviously RPG players come up with these ideas of characters they want to be, and Dragon Age The Veilguard does give you good tools at first, like, hey, pick your origin story, pick your backstory, pick your race, and there are conversation options that are unique.
Any game like this is going to be compared to Baldur's Gate 3 at this point.
To those moments, there are responses that are unique to you.
Crows always finish the job.
We just can't take initiative, right? My running with the Antom taught me that.
Don't let him scold you too much. V was worried about you.
So the tools are there to make something, but the game doesn't let you play as who you truly want to be. Like any BioWare game, when you make certain choices, they're going to approve or disapprove of said choices in dialogue. And I can count on one hand, no exaggeration, the amount of times I saw a party member disapprove of my choices. The approval rating in this game needs to be nerfed.
There's so many games like that.
The amount of times
like
my
Fallout does
bond
that too.
increased with them just by asking.
Your companion didn't like that.
Hey man, what's the weather like today? It's like they approved of that. I'm like, what? Why? I'm not saying you have to outright hate me, but like, why did you approve of that? And the problem that has been existing in the series since Dragon Age 2, where they ditched the original dialogue system from Origins and went with these more defined emotions for player choice that almost never match up, is horrible here. Like, look at this one. Look at me try to select a actually mean-spirited dialogue option and what my player says.
If we had a stronger civil government instead of a bunch of circus criminals,
I find this stuff hilarious.
Wouldn't have a foothold in the first place.
Who is this?
And because of this, I could not stand my character. The one who is at the center of this world, my Rook, I could not stand.
That's actually
anytime
hilarious.
He talked, he was not saying what I wanted to say, and in turn, the world was not reacting to what I wanted to say. It felt so stripped of the things that matter to me in an RPG. Good RPG dialogue lets you get involved deeply in the plot, obviously asking important questions, that sort of thing. But more than anything, it also defines the emotion of which you want to respond to things in. I don't like, as I'll get into in my section fully dedicated to characters in this review, how often this game just forces you to be nice to everybody when you just don't want to, when someone is annoying, when someone is a break.
So the thing with that is, it's honestly, it comes down to, I believe, being lazy with the game. If it's a lot easier to write various different branching options when all of them are nice, even the mean ones. So what that does is it makes it so that the people working on the game have to worry less about alternate cutscenes and things like that. It's the opposite of the Baldur's Gate 3 effect.
Abrasive, and you're like, no, screw you. It's like, it just never lets you. And look, y'all, I'm not asking for them to give me Dragon Age Origins level of choice. Like, yo, let me kill Liliana. Like, that's nuts, right? I love that level of choice, but I'm expecting low level choice. Like, can I disagree with my party members? No, you cannot. So the story, for those who are not caught up, is as follows.
The game
It's
looks
following the
decent, though, I'll
events
say
of
that.
Trespasser, and Solas is untempting to undo
visually.
the damage he has done to the world, even if it unleashes demons across all of Thedas. This is because Solas, as a character you'll learn in Inquisition, carries an immense amount of regret within him, and so some of this journey is about learning why he feels such a deep-seated
So there's
regret.
mystery. I
Now,
like
upon
that.
trapping Solas and forming a connection with the player, he's sealed away, while the other two elven gods in Gillenane and Elgar'nan have slipped out and are causing mayhem. That means it's up
Mischief,
to
if you will.
in Rook to assemble the Veilguard and take the fight to these elven gods. Taking a more linear approach, you'll visit places like Treviso, Minrathous, Ravain, and much more in hopes of finding the help you need with the clock ticking. One of the primary story concerns going into Veilguard was, hey, this used to be called Dragon Age Dreadwolf. Are they changing the name because the Dreadwolf isn't the focus anymore? And BioWare's reasoning for switching to Veilguard was because they said that the game focuses more on this cast of characters, but they also denied that, no, like, we didn't go this far to not have Solas in the game. So half a truth, half a lie, in my opinion, because Solas, I feel, at least for my standards and what I was expecting out of this story, is not in the game nearly enough. I talked to this guy 4 times before the finale, and 2 of those conversations
Well, that would be why they
were
changed the name.
extremely
Also,
brief.
Dreadwolf is a better
If this was
name.
a back and forth relationship where I could consistently, like, after side quests, after any main story mission, just go to Solas, reflect, have a conversation. Cool. I'm good with that. But just, he is not in the story enough, and that is such a mistake, because I get that they wanted to focus on these other characters in the Veilguard, but none of them sniff the level that Solas does, the level of importance that certain Dragon Age characters.
Did you say he doesn't sniff? It's a weird adjective.
Think of your Lilianas, think of your Morgans, think of your Variks, think of your Solases, right? Like, some characters are just head and shoulders in the level of importance above others, even if we have our favorites. And Veilguard's entire cast, I feel, is absent of any characters of major consequence. So in turn, when you put Solas on the shelf, you lose the heartbeat of your entire story. You can also collect memories of his throughout the Crossroads. These are in side quests that'll give you a little more attention on Solas, and you won't interact with him, but you'll learn more about him, and then the party will banter on what weaknesses they can extract from the elven god of tricks and lies. But despite all I said in a positive manner about Solas, BioWare just did not seem self-aware when writing the script for this game. I say that because the amount of time this game directly tells you, like, Solas is a liar, Solas is going to trick you, everyone in the Veilguard knows, you as the player know based on your experience in Inquisition and Trespasser, it is conveyed thoroughly, time in, time out, over and over. It is very clearly communicated to you, this is the expectation. And this story never goes against your expectations. There is no desire to surprise you. And I can understand the argument of, like, well, this is Solas as a character. Of course he's going to do it. But
that's similar to a lot of games. Like Call of Duty, you expect there to be a twist. At some point, there's going to be a twist. And if they just do the same sort of twist every single time, and you expect it's no longer a twist, it's just the story.
Spoiling the amount of times they go back to the well and you're like, okay, yeah, we already know how this is going to end. It doesn't have that Red Dead Redemption 2 effect where you're like, how is this mission going to go to shit? And the writing and the presentation is so compelling that it overrules your knowledge of things are going to go awry here. It's a matter of how they go awry. That doesn't happen here with the Dreadwolf. He's just consistently way too predictable. And so in turn, now the focus shifts to the other 2 big bads in Gillenane and Elgar'nan, who are, I don't want to say Corypheus level, because I think obvious connections to Solas and the Evanurus will help fellow Dragon Age fans along, but it just has the same Corypheus issue of not enough screen time, and when they are on screen, it's like, beware! Stop where you are, heroes! Oh my god! Before the finale, there are 2 major, we'll put those in air quotes, main story decisions, one of which had next to 0 consequence, if you want to even put it that way, where a line in a particular companion story changed for me. The other does change up an environment and some side quests that appear, and was probably the highlight of the first 25 hours for me that woke me up out of that dream. Perhaps the biggest defense for longtime fans, though, is the lack of the keep impact. Now, as a fellow BioWare connoisseur, I think it's safe to say that even in the darkest of times, as a BioWare fan, having the ability to carry my save over was enough to hold my moderate level of excitement for a BioWare game. Veilguard allows 3 choices for the keep. Did the Inquisitor romance
So
Solas?
if you've never played a Dragon Age game, but you played Mass Effect, this I believe what he's talking about here is like your character with the decisions that were made in previous games can carry over to the next game. And I somewhat understand the developer's point on this of we can only carry over so much because things would branch so much to the point where it would just be not feasible to make a game like
You can
that.
also customize how they look. Was the Inquisition disbanded at the start of Trespasser, which I feel has really no impact on the story whatsoever, just a couple of moments of flavor text. And weirdly, the third choice is if the Inquisitor vowed to save Solas from...
So he's making a good point here. If you're only going to give 3 decisions, they actually have to make a big impact when you choose those ones. But or otherwise, what is even the point?
himself or gave up on him. And it doesn't really feel too different from if you romanced him or not, but the way this keep is set up, it is basically telling you that you should probably make your Inquisitor an elf who romance Solas, and you just might get a great ending, who knows. But that is it when it comes to a world state carryover. No moment like Morrigan and Flemeth standing off with one another, fighting over the hero of Ferelden's kid. No Loghain appearing at Skyhold. No results from the Well of Sorrow's choice in Inquisition. It's just extremely disappointing how much this game lacks the reverence of this series' history, not only in the creative choices for the IP itself, as I've gotten into, and I will get into further with the gameplay, but just the lack of care for the fans who appreciate the series history and want to see these conversations.
So this is what we
and
just
these
talked about the other
continue
day
to evolve. It's just
with Call of Duty, the difference
non-existent.
between
in many ways, it feels
like
like
an
it's
actual
made
fan
for a new
and a
audience.
casual
that's
player. Yeah,
especially
new audience.
emphasized to me when some of the lore that they go over is retreading old grounds. I do think some Dragon Age fans will be like, I knew this already. Why are you stating to me like it's new information? And this is what I call scared writing. I think BioWare got scared of the idea of let's continue this story in a meaningful manner, even though it's been, by the time of this release, 10 years since the last Dragon Age game. Yeah, people may have forgot, but I hate to bring up the comparison because I know it'll be endless for this game.
Baldur's Gate 3.
But when you look at Baldur's Gate 3 and how long it was between 2 and 3, as someone who has not played much of Baldur's Gate 1 or 2, and I will write that wrong one day, I promise, but as someone who's not played much of those games, I adored Baldur's Gate 3, and it made me very interested to go and check out what was happening with Baldur's Gate 1, what was happening with Baldur's Gate 2, and get that context. But I think BioWare got a little afraid of that shadow lurking over the game and decided to take what I call the easy way out. And the result is here in a game that I just think
no one is going to be able to do what Baldur's Gate did. And I get what he's saying about not wanting to take that route. But the decision to make the game more linear as opposed to branching is, in my opinion, with this type of game, a very bad thing. And I think it's something that over time happened to Mass Effect as well.
I think this story isn't great enough, and I haven't even gotten to the characters yet, which is probably my single biggest problem with the game. Now, as expected in a BioWare game, the companion stories are the focus. You're going to help these individuals solve their personal problems, and they'll be more ready for the finale where a lot can go right or wrong. Now, the biggest problem with the characters, outside of them just not being very interesting to me, was the pace. You spend so much of the game interacting with them briefly outside of the main story, then the finale appears, and you have like 10 hours of companion missions to just grind that feel like an endless string, and you're very much motivated to do this because you'll get an awful ending if you don't. Typically in a BioWare game, as the story moves along, so too do these loyalty missions. They kind of trigger and set off at different times, but I'll wrap up what I think is one arc of the companion mission, go back to the lighthouse to pick up another, and a new conversation unlocked over here, and it's just endless. And I think that for some this will work because
filler, is this what he's getting at? It just feels like filler.
Just get to dive into the characters. But I liked in BioWare games when there was this feeling of moving along the story with these characters, lock in step.
Well, that's
but this
that's
game is
Mass
very much
Effect,
like,
right?
You don't get a ton of companion progression. Then you hit the final 10 hours of the game. They're like,
specifically
boom,
Mass Effect
go after
2.
it, kid. Go get all those stories, and it's just constant, endless, and it starts to emphasize a lot of problems with the game's writing. Now, I want to start off positively with the characters because I feel like I've been very critical this whole time. Emmerich is awesome. He's an enriching character. The way he interfaces with the rest of the Veilguard due to his unique ability to communicate with the dead leads to interesting and funny conversations between teammates. The general theme of a guy who can talk to the dead while also being afraid of dying is a little predictable, but what they do with him really worked for me. He's well acted. I hung on to any conversation I had with him.
It does look like just a little too cartoony.
Manfred. And also the choice that he had was one I found found quite difficult because it did the best thing an RPG can do, and that's pose two extremely compelling options to pick between.
Especially him.
Unfortunately, he was the only one I felt this way about. Harding was another highlight. I really like how they took her as this side character in Inquisition and expanded upon her in a very meaningful way. She also feels more important than ever because of some of the massive lore reveals that she has a direct connection to. Now, I do wonder what Dragon Age fans will feel like with how BioWare has handled some of the lore changes, and in the case of the Qunari, they flipped the dang thing on its head, and I'll leave that mess for later. But with the dwarves and the elves, there are some serious reveals here, and I think Harding will be a more interesting character for some folks because of that. Bellara, though, is the quintessential example of a character from another series. Now, don't get me wrong,
What does she mean by that?
She has some charm to her, and I think some people will like her, but between the art style shift, the music that plays when she speaks, and her story,
yeah, that was the Pixar music.
It feels Disney to me. I hate to say it, but it really
what it looks
does.
like.
And when I look
Pixar.
at other powerful woman character in this series, like a Liliana, a Morgan, or a Cassandra, it's just hard to say that Bellara hails from the same exact franchise. And that's just my 2 cents on her. While she wasn't my cup of tea, I can see some enjoying her energy for the game and her performance. But Bellara is also the perfect touchstone for character pacing. Almost all of these stories, even the ones I enjoyed most, like Emmerich.
So the thing that I will say about like the art design and the character design and everything like that is I think most games like this have pushed towards like the dark and gritty, whereas this game is almost going to Disney princess levels of style.
Felt so static most of the time. I never felt like, outside of maybe Harding and kind of Emmerich, that I've gone on a journey with this character, and they're very different on the other side of it, which is quite literally stated as the reason you go out to do these companion missions before you save the world. Like, they say to you, we need to kind of get rid of our demons before we do this so that we can focus on the task at hand. And then they kind of just walk away from it, I feel, sort of samey and not transformed enough. And because it's so static, characters like Lucanus, Tosh, Bellara, Davarin, Helt, really all of them just recycle the same set of talking points for every new conversation, and eventually you're going to play enough of this game and you'll have a number of moments where you go,
the same thing over and over
I've
again.
heard that one before. I think I've heard them say that 4 times now, and it's a little frustrating. But last but not least is Tosh, and I feel like some reviewers are going to shy away from this character and any sort of critical conversation on Tosh because of the subject matter that this character tackles.
Go on.
However, I believe if we are to grow as an industry, if we are to grow as an art form, we have to be able to speak constructively about these characters without it always resulting in mudslinging. So I'm going to go ahead and get into this without spoiling anything whatsoever. So if you're going to place a message into a character like you do with Tosh, it requires nuance and thought to actually have impact, which I think BioWare did completely miss the mark on here. I'm totally for stories that want to bridge the gap of understanding and opening people's minds. Like when I was in high school, Gone Home was a pivotal game for me in opening my mind. It happens. That's why games are art and why these sorts of stories can be important. Now, to properly critique this, I'd actually like to look at a character that tackled tough subject matter with such elegance that it still impresses me to this day. And that's introducing Parvati from The Outer Worlds. Parvati was conceived by writer Chris Latoll as asexual before he left Obsidian Entertainment.
Oh, yes.
This character was then placed in the hands of another writer in Kate Dollarhide. Now, Kate Dollarhide herself is asexual and spoke at length in interviews after the game's launch on how this character was equal parts terrifying and exciting to work on. She was able to put a piece of herself into this character and in turn bring it to a whole new level. But at the same time, it's scary to do that because
it looks
you're
like it
showing
has
a piece of yourself
horns,
to
so
people
like
you've never even met before. Now, lived experiences drive the best of scriptwriters, whether it be our
I do
grief,
agree with that,
sorrow, happiness, or everything in between. It's that thoughtfully and artistically conveyed sense of emotion that carries our favorite characters in our hearts. And as a result, Parvati resonated with asexual gamers who felt seen in a way an RPG or hell, a game, has scarcely or possibly never even represented before. At the same time, it wasn't the crux of her entire existence as a character. Parvati had wit, comedy,
such a good
smarts,
point,
and a healthy dosage of being socially awkward.
Oh.
Even in the real world, when something like this becomes someone's entire personality, it's frustrating. Like, you want to be like, know them as a person, and then their entire personality is based off of being asexual, for example. That's frustrating to begin with. And so, yeah, if you write a character where their entire personality and their entire story is around that one thing, it doesn't work.
Beer. I guess, yeah, I can do that. Beer can be good. I bet.
The quest design encouraged players to kind of play wingman for her, which was a bit different for an RPG where typically you're trying to romance everyone. But Parvati also had much more plot relevance and dimensions to her character beyond said asexuality. It is that which makes her a believable character in this world, and not just a laundry list of talking points to get across in quite possibly the most obtuse matter I have seen in entertainment. The problem with Tosh is not really, to me, the character of which BioWare is conceived, but how they are handled. Tosh is written like ideas spawned from social media discourse as she barges into every conversation in quite possibly the most unlikable manner. Worse yet, it exposes problems with the game horribly, like not being able to be mean to Tosh, not being able to talk down to her for the way she behaves. It also spotlights what I view as a lack of communication between the writing team when Tosh's values are inconsistent.
I'm from Ravane. Not like I follow the Qun.
You've got the arm ropes.
Sure, I wear a lot of stuff. You don't get to tell me who I am. Doesn't matter anyway. The Antom don't follow the Qun either. Not anymore.
Then, 30 minutes later, no exaggeration because I have the timestamp for it, this happens.
So, the Dragon Hunter has a softer side.
The Qun says you take care of people.
Like, I don't know. To me, it sounds like in one moment you follow the Qun, in the other, it's just not fitting you and what you're trying to put forward for the character.
Weird.
But back to the Outer Worlds, I can leave Parvati behind. Like, frame one, conversation one, I can tell her to screw off. I can tell her I don't like her.
This is a
I
good
can choose
point.
not to help her. That is what made the Outer Worlds go around, because you had choice to approach, not just in being mean, but how you also wanted to be nice to the character. So I do think Tosh, out of the entire character roster, is unfortunately the biggest miss of them all, because it does swing the hardest for something different that Dragon Age and BioWare really.
There's a dog in the background? That's a dog in the background.
Least, romance, which is a big part of a BioWare game. I mean, the writing here, I found specifically, and I'm sorry, I hate to use the word, man. I hate to use the word, but cringe? I mean, hearing is believing. Go ahead.
Please listen. You're not alone.
This is hilarious. This stuff I find
Whatever's
hilarious.
out there, we'll face it together, I promise. Together.
Oh, that is bad.
I could kiss you right now. I'm going to kiss you right now.
Please, there's something we might need to. It's your magic.
Rook?
You make the world spin, Lace Harding.
Oh my god.
Lyrium. It's like I'm infused with lyrium.
I noticed it when we touched. That night when we talked about your dreams.
You knew? You knew, and you still kissed me?
Wow, I feel drunk.
Yeah, it's because I turned your head into mush.
Or it's love.
You boob. This is not funny.
You boob.
Okay, I'll fix it. I promise. I will find a way and I will fix it. Okay? Okay? Damn it. No, don't touch me.
And my last note on the narrative here, and I feel like I've just like
Oh my.
systematically dissected this game for all it's worth. And I haven't even talked about the gameplay, but
He hasn't even talked about the
problem with a
gameplay.
lot of game writing today, in my opinion, is characters don't talk like people. And I feel like the medium of writing has evolved game after game.
They don't
where
talk-
we should
that's a good point.
expect that from characters. But the way conversations are picked up and put down and the way topics are
I
introduced.
think it's because writing conversation is very difficult to begin with in movies and TV shows. And then having to translate that with gameplay and decisions is even harder. Because there's like this, like when you have a conversation, there's flow to it. When you have to like stop and make a decision, it ruins the flow of a conversation. So it's very difficult to do.
is so forced and hand-fed. Like a writing team was in a room and said, we want this next conversation to be about the Grey Wardens. So let's make it that, even if it is introduced in a horrible manner like this.
Now then.
Can't imagine why.
I'm starting to dream that I'm a griffin. Squawk.
What?
Well, you get high marks for effort.
He's toying with me. So what brings you by?
Oh my god.
Just curious, really. Wondering what it's like being a Grey Warden. They've always been these legendary warriors living apart from the world.
Like imagine me
This is
standing at the water
horrible.
cooler and I'm like, hey man, what's going on? How's work going today? Yeah, nice weather we're having. Hey, by the way, can you tell me how exactly you got a job here? I want to know more about it. It's like, holy smokes, where the hell did that come from? I don't know. Some people will
Segues.
ask
You need
random
some
questions.
segues.
I have been guilty of it. Some people will find me overly critical of this sort of element of the game, but it pops up so
it's
many
important.
times that
I agree with
it
you.
just became a terrible distraction. So that's my whole spiel on the game's writing, man. I just, as you can tell, had a lot of problems with it, a lot, and it was just supremely disappointing on the writing front.
Let's hear some gameplay
we still
stuff.
got gameplay to get into if you're still hanging with me here, so thank you for bearing with me. It's extremely repetitive, and this is really the straw that breaks the camel's back. I feel it can go either way. If your game's insanely fun, it's going to sting, but I can tolerate some bad writing. You know, I value writing a lot. I value storytelling a lot.
Like,
Sometimes
that's what I've said about Call of Duty games as well, like the campaigns in Call of Duty games. Like if your gameplay is really good, the writing can be worse. And I think that's like Black Ops 6 that just came out is like actually an example of that, where I think the writing was kind of like average, but the gameplay was so good that it like bumped up the story.
Or even than the gameplay. It also goes the other way. Sometimes a great story can override pretty simple gameplay. So I feel
Agree
like
with that.
BioWare
Modern
could
Warfare
have won
2019.
on either end of the spectrum for me here. But the repetition in this gameplay is really stunning given the critique that Inquisition felt about also being very repetitive. And I feel like Inquisition may be in some ways less repetitive than Dragon Age The Veilguard, which I just like, holy shit, am I actually fucking saying that, dude? Like, I can't believe it, but like, it's true. I'm sorry, but it's true. You know, you have your heavy attack, your light attack, your ranged attack, a dodge here, a parry there. All the fundamentals are there, and they're solid.
Just
like,
basics.
it's a good framework. But the problem is, your first fight in the game, your first ever fight in the game, is the same exact as your final fight in the game.
Yeah, that's an
The
issue.
same. The mechanics never, ever, ever change. Even some of the biggest fights in the game are reskins of the old ones. And this goes back to what I said in the preview. You see a snapshot of a highlight reel of like, oh, there are enemies with barriers. Oh, there's enemies with armor. And, oh, I got to do ranged attack for barriers. And, oh, I got to do heavy attack for armor. But never do you see...
And I would be well more pissed than him if that review thing happened to me. Like, well more pissed.
different enemy types like that. Maybe you can only break their armor if you apply weakness to them. Just little things to engage your brain a little bit more on the most minimal level are not here. And eventually my build was so strong that I was plowing through the core fundamental mechanics of the game. Like, oh, hey, barriers, right? That requires me using my ranged weapon, but I'm so strong now that I'm just going to melee through that. Oh, armored. I'm supposed to use my heavy attacks. I'm going to use my light attacks because I can get through it quicker and I'm doing a ton of damage. You can just break the game and in turn break the mechanics, rendering them all entirely useless.
Then it's
a
button
lot
mashing.
of times the camera sucks and you'll just get stuffed in the walls. And it's awful, man. And sometimes the arenas are way too small. So yeah, the repetition and frustration really set in. There is the ability wheel here. This is the big change for Dragon Age's combat. It's always been different, entry in, entry out. And look, hand me my L. I was wrong, man. I was totally wrong about this. I thought that this was a good play, this kind of hybrid between a lot of what made Dragon Age by this point in time, some action
switching
combat,
between
kind of like
characters.
2, a little bit of strategy, in a sense, reminding me of Inquisition, but not fully. But the ability wheel, just pulling that over from Mass Effect and comboing for detonations. Like, okay, cool. I like the idea
I like
here.
the idea
I
of
can
that,
get
yeah.
behind this. But what happens is the same thing that happens with the other mechanics in the game. You just become so strong that you don't really need to lean on your companions whatsoever. But also, I just think a better
Rendered
approach
moot.
would have been to have each companion bring in their own weakness that they can target on enemies. So then I would have to lean on them. I would have to bring up my ability wheel when I'm fighting. Like, oh,
Well, it's the
hey,
same thing that he's saying about not having to worry about how, like, the type of enemy that you're fighting. When you don't have to worry about the type of enemy, you're not going to have to worry about making weaknesses on them either. Also, just realized my camera died. Sorry, I don't know how long ago that died.
Hey, Harden can only apply Sundered. Okay, great. I'm going to take her with me in this area where enemies are weak to Sundered, and I'm going to use her a lot to break defense. Like, even a design level change on that could have made the world of a difference in how I engage with the combat. But eventually, you just render everything the game offers you as useless, and the enemy design is the exact same from boss fight 1 to final boss in the game. And it just wears you down. It wears you down. It's tiring to play. It's boring to play. There is a term that I have used to describe
word.
Dragon Age as of recently, as my understanding of the series grows, and I view it as a war of attrition. If you can outlast the series' greatest...
Okay, unpopular take. I felt that way about Assassin's Creed Valhalla, just because it was so long that it was like a war of attrition just getting to the end of the game.
flaws, you'll
Maybe
love it.
unpopular
And
opinion.
Dragon Age has definitely been an up and down series. It's widely agreed upon that Origins was amazing, but 2 is very up and down with its repetitive environments and its drop in combat difficulty. Inquisition, you have to outlast the war table to get to the best parts of the main story and the cameos that really make the game worthwhile. And in Veilguard, I would say the battle of attrition lies on both ends, but
so
maybe
he's saying
if you
it's
see something
every
in these
Dragon Age
characters,
game.
then you're going to have to outlast this combat, which just doesn't evolve at all. And that's unfortunately also because the environments are very repetitive. And I remember making a comment saying like, oh, this could be vindication for Dragon Age 2, but it's not, because it'll remind people of a lot of the biggest problems with Dragon Age 2. Remember running around Kirkwall and going like, oh man, everything here looks the same. And I've been through this area 40 times now for another side quest. And I do like Dragon Age 2 a lot. I think it has its charm, and I do appreciate it as a game that was made in like a year or so's time.
That's impressive.
It was definitely
made
an
in a year?
unrealistic timeline put upon BioWare. So maybe in this little time capsule, I find it a bit forgivable. But when I look at something like Dragon Age The Veilguard with its environmental diversity of like, you're going to go to Treviso and Minrathous, I'm like, okay, cool. Like, how are we going to expand these areas? And you just retread old ground constantly for main and side content. Like, you're always back in these hubs, running the same streets, running the same areas over and over and over. It is an issue of the game being bloated in its own way. Like, it's way too long for how often you're revisiting these locations and how little they expand, showing you something different. As you progress in the main story, you're going to unlock these new areas to explore called the Crossroads, and they're going to be connected with Illuvians that allow you to go to these different areas. It's basically your hub between all the other hubs.
So they're
And
trying to do the Dark Souls thing where you can go through the same area but open up shortcuts essentially, and it just doesn't
progressing
land.
the story, these areas will also fill up with side quests, which they'll let you know on the map when they do so. The other thing I have an issue with is like Inquisition side content was heavily critiqued. Like, it was boring filler stuff, and I wouldn't say it's Inquisition level, but I can't think of a side quest that really hit me and went, oh, that was good. Outside of one.
Oh, well, they had one.
It involves Solas' memories, and if you're going to pick up the game anyway, this is one I will strongly recommend. Please do it. Especially if you're an elf. It's awesome. I think the latest evolution in side quests is trying to provide a player with a feeling of, oh my gosh, why was that side content? That should have been main story content.
That's, I think,
How
that
was
always
missable?
been the way.
And I think developers are scared to.
The first time I realized like what side content was Oblivion, and they had like the different guilds, like the Fighters Guild or the Brotherhood, or not Brotherhood, but the like the Assassins Guild or Thieves Guild or whatever, and they felt like they were their own campaigns in and of themselves. And when side quests aren't that, I just don't think there's a point of having them.
Embrace missable content. But I look at a game like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, so many stories and its many side quests feel mandatory even to get the most value out of the game itself. They're stories that bring the cast together, share intimate moments, big character building moments, and they're off to the side. You could totally miss them, and that's the beauty of them. It rewards your engagement, not just with good loot, but also with some of the best character moments in the entire game. Whereas something like Veilguard are the side quests of old. Not quite Inquisition fetch quest level, but definitely that kind of redundant, go collect 3 of these, and then go fight this enemy here, and go fight that enemy there, but no real interesting stories are told throughout. But the other thing these environments lean on, or really combat as well, are 2 things. And one is the red crystals that you're going to find throughout. You basically have to pop these crystals to sometimes pop barriers on enemies, or pop barriers that are blocking doors, or pop barriers that are blocking whatever in front of you, or blight boils that are scattered throughout the environment. You pop those boils, they all centralize around a single final boil. You pop that one, and then maybe you have access through that same doorway. It's just these 2 constantly, over and over and over. And when you mix that in with the same enemy types,
those
like,
are
oh,
bad
it's the
puzzles.
Venatori again, or oh, it's the awful-looking Darkspawn again, or it's the Antom with the awful-looking Qunari again, which I said in my preview already. Like, I don't like the redesigns for some of these characters and some of these races. I don't think they're great. It's just, it's repetitive. It's repetitive and uninteresting. And so that's all I got to say. One of my longest reviews I've done, but I felt like a powder keg about the burst just playing this game. There were so many times I was stopped dead in my tracks, jaw on the
I would have stopped playing. The fact that he made it through, got to the end, I'm proud of him.
floor for all of the wrong reasons. Like, did they really just do that? And part of it, yeah, man, I'm a huge fan. Like, I'm not going to shy away from that. That's the angle I bring. I love BioWare. I do. But when I felt my opinion in real time for games like Dragon Age Inquisition and Mass Effect Andromeda improving in real time as I was playing Dragon.
Hot take. I don't think Mass Effect Andromeda was that bad of a game. Like, it wasn't as good as the other ones, but I don't think it was that bad.
The Veilguard, when I was thinking, comparing, contrasting, that's when I knew they had lost me, man. And it was a really, really sad moment. I felt horrible. I still feel horrible about the game. I feel bad that I don't like it. I've never experienced that before, but I wish so badly I loved this game. I really do. It's a heartbreaker among heartbreakers. Hopefully others like it more than me. That's how I'll close it out. I don't care if I'm ever an outlier, but if there's a time I've ever hoped to be an outlier here, I hope more people like it than me. I hope that I'm just a cranky old dude at the age of almost.
Which IGN gave it a 9 out of 10, which is insanity. But from every other review that I've seen, people aren't liking it.
Almost 30. A cranky old dude who just is too jaded to enjoy Veilguard. But I don't know. There was just so many problems here. I'm like, it became a question of, and not a, how dare you disagree with me, by the way. If you enjoy this, I'm not here to rain on your parade. But it really did become a moment for me of like, how could someone play this for 50 plus hours and not walk away with issues? Maybe people walk away liking it more than me, but how could you walk away from this not having problems?
I want to read the comments after this.
So we'll see. I do think it'll be a very telling review cycle, but nonetheless, ladies and gentlemen, that's all I got for you. Those are my thoughts on Dragon Age The Veilguard. Thank you for...
All right, let's finish this with some comments. 90% of the OG staff quit, retired, laid off. The elves talk or act like elves. Dwarves don't act like dwarves, etc. Everyone just acts like humans. A human millennial or Zoomer from California. I mean, that's probably who write it. I actually don't know where BioWare from. Modern language in fantasy worlds is just so gross. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, Dragon Age is done. This will be my first time not buying a Dragon Age game. Sad. Yeah.
For bearing with me if you sat through.
But I don't know. If you played the game, I want to hear what you guys think. This was a game that I was originally going to play on the channel. When I heard how long it was, that's actually what put me off of doing it for that. And then the reviews came out, and then I was like, okay, I'm glad. And then IGN came out and gave it a 9 out of 10. So who knows what they're thinking. But like I said, let me know what you think. And thanks for watching.